So I've mentioned many of these techniques in quite a few videos in the past, but I've never created one video that kind of summarized all of these topics together. I should say all of these techniques together. They're always on kind of one-off basis, but I wanted to create this video. It's kind of a one-stop shop type of a idea, I suppose, where everything is kind of combined together in order to help those that are maybe struggling with composition, or it definitely has helped me over the years, to ultimately stop taking boring landscape photos. Because if you think about this right here, we all see the world in the exact same way. All of our eyes are at the top of our head, and regardless regardless how tall you happen to be, we all see the world at eye level. So when you create photographs where you're basically just standing, you put the camera to your eye and you take the image, a lot of times, I mean, you can create a good image that way, but it's not going to be super unique. It might not be very eye-catching because we see the world that way all the time. But when you can vary your perspective a little bit, that's how you can start to create images that look different than what we see when we just walk out of our house every day. And that's just a great technique or a great way to look at composition without having to get so fixated on things like leading lines and the rule of thirds and all these other different compositional techniques. Just thinking about perspective, just thinking about doing things different than you normally do when you just walk out of the house, when you normally see things at eye level. So to jump right into it, the very first technique is something that's called natural framing. And what is so cool about natural framing is that really only photographers pay attention to it. Most people that go about their day looking or, going to wherever they're going, they're not going to see a composition that has got natural framing. And these are great examples of it right here. This is from Utah. Just a very, very good example of using natural framing to frame this area right through here. Here's another good example. This is an iPhone image from quite a few years ago. I think from my very first trip to Acadia National Park, but using these trees and using these branches and these rocks right here just to create a natural frame around Boulder Beach right through here. And of course, this is one of my favorite use cases of natural framing. Yosemite Falls is a classic composition, putting the falls right in between the trees on the left and the right side. And using this natural framing technique is a great way to create a very eye-catching photograph, because like I said before I started this section, most people don't look for natural framing in the environment because it's kind of like a photographer's thing. Here's another good example here from the Golden Gate Bridge, is using these trees right here as a natural frame for the actual bridge itself. So there's a lot of cool ways to utilize natural framing whenever you start looking for it. And the thing about it is if you don't really have it top of mind when you're on location, there's a good chance you could miss it. So next time you get on location, when you want to try and create something a little bit different, something a little bit more unique, something a little more interesting, pay attention to natural framing. You can't always find natural framing in the landscape that you happen to be photographing, but more times than you might anticipate, it is there. You just kind of have to really search for it. Now, the second technique is just to vary focal lengths. So this right here, this is an example. This is from a last year's trip to Iceland, my workshop there. And this is the way that I viewed this image. I stood at this location, and this is exactly what I saw with my naked eye. I saw all of this going on. And it's not an awful photograph, but it's a little bit confusing. I don't really know where to look. So this is exactly what I saw with my naked eye. And I feel like this is a great example of just an image that just seems to be lacking something. It's not super interesting. But by putting on a telephoto lens and zooming to the top of this mountain and just waiting for the clouds to kind of move in through here, waiting for the light to come through here, this image to me is much, much more interesting versus this right here. So just zooming into the top here, putting on a very long focal length, and doing the same thing here as well. Zooming into the small intimate details. I loved all of the triangular shapes in the iceberg here, and this nice blue color was extremely eye-catching. So zooming into those details there. But both of those images together, in my personal opinion, are substantially better than this total image here that I saw with my naked eye. And I think that this right here is a great example of just trying to get away from what you see with your naked eye, trying to get away from that focal length, trying to get away from shooting everything at eye level. Here's another good example of a Skogafoss in Iceland as well. This image right here, capturing the entire waterfall. It's not bad, but once again, it's just kind of the standard image that you see from this location. But putting on a telephoto lens and just zooming in to the actual power of the water falling, to me, is much, much more interesting than this right here. In this image, was captured right in this area here. And I just put on a longer focal length, just set it on my camera on a tripod, found an area where the water was falling in an interesting and somewhat unique pattern. Very fast shutter speed, and just sat there and just took image after image after image until I got the one that I liked. One more example here, Boulder Beach. This is an ultra wide angle lens. This is not exactly how we see the world. This is a little bit wider than our focal length, but this is it's an interesting photograph. I love the boulders in the foreground here. But putting on a super telephoto lens and zooming into this area here, I find to be much more interesting. Fortunate enough to have two people standing right next to each other here to add a little bit of scale. But just varying that focal length, I think, is absolutely fantastic to not only tell a story, and I'm always talking about creating a story and creating a storyboard when you're on location, and varying the focal length is an absolutely fantastic way to do that. So just trying to get away from that focal length that we all see the world in, and trying to maybe get ultra wide, super wide angle lenses, super telephoto lenses, maybe just shift your perspective a little bit. These are all fantastic ways to just create something that's a little bit more eye-catching than the standard view that we see the world in. Now, the third technique is just to get close up, because once again, we're walking around, eyes at the top of our head. Very rarely are we getting just right up next to something, very close. So when you get close to things, not only does that create a more unique perspective because it's unusual for us, but you're also going to pick up a lot of interesting texture. And I think that interesting texture is one of the most, eye-grabbing or attention-grabbing techniques that you can put in your photographs. And obviously, it's very simple to do. You just get close to something. This is an image from an Acadia workshop last year. Something totally different. I never capture images like this, but I put on a telephoto lens, put my tripod kind of straddling this area, and zoom straight down and capture this. And I love the colors, I love all the textures, all the detail in this photograph. Another example right here. There is nothing exciting about this scene at all. This is your basic, a little piece of seaweed on a beach, not an interesting sky at all, so I completely eliminated it. But by getting very close to the seaweed, this tiny piece of seaweed, which honestly was smaller than the size of a penny, but putting on a wider lens, getting very close to it, the seaweed looks a little bit more interesting. But what's most important or most exciting to me is I can feel that texture in the sand. I can see that texture in the sand. And that is what I find is most appealing. Plus the little bubbles in the waves coming in. This image just has a lot of texture to it. And I find that to be very interesting because once again, I normally don't see the world like this. I don't go to a beach and just lay on my stomach and start to look at pieces of seaweed. This is a little bit more unique. Another example here, this is from a video a couple weeks ago, but just getting very close to these tiny little droplets of dew on this blade of grass. Makes a little bit more interesting image because I'm sure you would agree that if the dew and the drops of water were not on these blades, the blade of grass right here, there would be really nothing to focus on. It'd be kind of a confusing image because the blade of grass by itself isn't quite enough to hold the viewer's attention, but those couple little droplets of water is really all you need. One more example here where, this is just your standard leaf in the woods, but getting very close to it, you can see all of this detail through here, and then using a very shallow depth of field and where the focus kind of falls off, really grabs the viewer's attention right here in the center area. And although that we see that all the time, in every woodland area you go to, you see leaves on these trees, but oftentimes you don't get right up next to it and really examine all the different striations, all the different textures and lines and detail in those leaves. So by doing that, that creates something that's just a little bit more unique. Now, the fourth technique, and perhaps one of my favorite techniques, and it's probably one of the best pieces of compositional advice I've ever received in my entire life, and it's just to get low. Because once again, our eyes are on top of our head. I know I've said it about 1,000 times in this video. I'm really trying to drive home that fact that our eyes are up here. We see everything like this, but when you get really low to the ground, that's the complete polar opposite than what we normally see. Polar opposite than what we see on a day-to-day basis. So getting low is fantastic compositional advice. This is from my recent trip to Bryce Canyon. But getting very low to these roots right here in the foreground makes this image much more interesting than it would have been if I just shot it at eye level. And these roots, they really weren't that big. They were kind of, I don't know, maybe 2 feet is about probably less than that. 1.5 feet is about how big this entire kind of root structure was. But by putting on a wider focal length, getting very close to it, makes those roots look a little bit larger than they actually were. And it just creates a much more interesting photograph as opposed to if I just walked up to the scene and just pulled the camera up to my eye and just snapped this photograph. I wouldn't even been able to see the roots. Honestly, you would have just seen Bryce Canyon in the background. So getting low is fantastic. Once again, getting low, getting close, you're getting texture, you're getting a lot of detail. This image is not, there's nothing super dynamic happening here. There's a somewhat of an interesting sky, I suppose, but getting close to this area, the tide had receded, and it just revealed all of this interesting structure and all of this interesting seaweed. And by getting very, very close to it, you can really see all of this detail and all the different areas of a highlights versus shadows. Just creates a very three-dimensional feeling in this photograph. And to me, this is much, much more interesting as opposed to just your standard photograph at eye level. And once again, this is an image from a video, I think a couple weeks ago, and getting extremely close to this tiny little mushroom, I think is absolutely fantastic. I didn't even see these little, I don't know what they are, flies or gnats on the top of this mushroom, but getting that close to the image, I was able to pick those up. You get all of this interesting detail and the striation of this mushroom. And all of that was completely lost until I got so low and so close to this mushroom, and I started to kind of look up at the mushroom a little bit. That's how low I actually was. And this is extremely, extremely more unique than just walking past this mushroom and just saying, oh, there's a mushroom on the ground. This is a completely different viewpoint that nobody would ever see unless you were like me and you lay down on your chest to capture this photograph. So getting low is absolutely critical. I shouldn't say critical. It's absolutely fantastic advice. So the next time you're on location and you find a composition that you're kind of working a little bit, get on your stomach, get on your chest or your stomach and lay down and really, really examine that composition and see if there's something a little bit more interesting you could create or in addition to. Now, the final piece of advice or technique that I love to use, and it's something that I used to use years ago and stopped for a while, but now I kind of do it again as well, but it's just getting high. And what I mean by that is, there's multiple different ways to do this. You could do this with a drone. This is from my Badlands workshop a couple months ago. And I haven't used drones in years until recently. And I kind of, re-sparked my love for it because you're able to see things that you can't see with your naked eye. You get a totally different perspective. And I absolutely love this photograph right here. Once again, from Iceland workshop last year, just the lava fields. This is a view you only get when you get above the lava. Looking at the volcano erupting, standing there, you get a completely different viewpoint. But when you can get above it, it looks totally, totally different. And it doesn't always have to be with a drone. This is actually just in Kauai, just looking from a peak of another mountain towards the other side of the mountain. But that's just something a little bit different as well. And then, of course, you can always do it from a helicopter as well. And this is from also from Kauai. I don't do a whole lot of helicopter photography. I was actually deathly afraid of helicopters for the longest time. But after this trip, I got a little bit more comfortable. But this creates a totally, totally different perspective that we normally don't see with our naked eye. So getting high, and whether that's drones or getting on the top of a mountain and photographing another mountain or in a helicopter or however you want to get above your subject and shoot down on it or shoot across, that creates something that's a little bit more unique. And all of these 5 techniques are a great way to just stop taking those boring landscape photos or any type of photograph. And if there's one thing I hope that anybody would get out of this video, is that we see the world at eye level. Like I said, it doesn't matter if you're 4'11" or you're 7'2", you see the world the same way. You see it at whatever your eye level is. And when you can create something that is completely different from eye level, that creates those unique images. That creates those attention grabbing and those eye catching photographs because it's something that we normally don't see on a day-to-day basis. So next time you're on location, I'd highly encourage you, when you find your composition, see if there's any kind of a natural framing opportunity that you could use. Are there different focal lengths you could use? Ultra wide angle, super telephoto that would create a scene that you can't see with your naked eyes. Or get very close to pick up texture and detail, or maybe get very low to the subject. Or is there a way to get above your subject to create something different than what you can see with your naked eye? So I really do hope that was interesting. Like I said, I've mentioned most of these in videos over the past couple of years, but I've never put them all in one video before. And I've gotten a couple requests for these types of videos where you kind of summarize a bunch of different videos together. And I totally get that because it's A lot easier to watch one 15-minute, 10 or 15-minute video versus, 5 or 6 15-minute videos, and you kind of got to search around to find them in different playlists or this or that. So I do hope that this video was helpful. And if you did enjoy it, if you could give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already, share the video with your friends if you think you know anyone who would enjoy it as well. And as always, I really do appreciate you watching this week's video, and I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye.